I'm John Travis in Novato, California on the 16th of September 2020, talking to Debra Pascali Bonaro in Rivervale, New Jersey. Welcome, Debra. It's
Oh,
been,
thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here and see you again.
yeah, it's been almost 20 years
Yeah.
in Boulder, and you've been up to a lot of amazing things that we'll get into. But I want to start with what led you into the career that you've created and what your birth experience was like, your birth, your parents, siblings, early childhood experiences, and all that. So let's start at the beginning.
Yes. Well, I have to say the beginning for me, obviously being born, right? And I know that my birth influenced me, but as a young girl, I was really fortunate to not only have my mother, my grandmother, but also my great grandmother. And they told me their birth stories. And my great grandmother, I was pretty mesmerized with as a young girl. Here, this woman in her 80s seemed really old to me, and not only would she tell me her birth story with this love and joy and ecstasy, but she one time acted it out for me and kind of waddled over to the kitchen sink because she was short and very round Italian woman. And she waddled in her 80s and actually leaned over the sink and told me how the midwife caught the baby from behind. And she had this moment of herself reaching down for this imaginary baby that she was reenacting and bringing it up and just filled with ecstasy and love. And she always told her stories about moving and walking and the challenges, but she really focused on the joys and that it was work, but you do it. And so
Oh,
having that story retold to
yeah.
me a lot, I think shaped so much of everything that came after, from my own births to my passion for helping to support people so they too can find their power and pleasure in birth.
What a beginning. Yeah.
Yeah,
So
it was really amazing. And knowing that, like everybody in my family, because of the time, right? My great grandmother, she was giving birth in the early 1900s, where all birth was at home. So she had 8 children at home, some in New York City when she first came through Ellis Island and was in New York. And then where I am right now, she literally lived most of her life around the corner from here in Woodcliff Lake, New Jersey. And she called it the farm because I'm sure back in those days it was farmed.
mhm.
But now it's not, it's suburbia. But that shaped a lot for me. I know that she gave me my strong belief in birth. And then my grandmother gave birth at the time, kind of wartime. Home birth wasn't happening as much in this region, but they had what I kind of perceive as the first birth centers. And it was now a family practice physician, not a midwife. So there were shifts happening, but she basically gave birth at someone else's house. And at that time, they called it a sanatorium. So she still had a home birth story of my mother. And it was my mother giving birth to me at a time where we had lost home birth. And my mother was the first person in the family to go to give birth in the hospital in a very large, big Italian family. And this really impacted me because that's me. And I really questioned as a young girl, why did everybody else get to be born at home? And I had to go to the hospital. But my own birth story really was led by all these women that had birthed at home, because when my mother was in labor, she was living at the time with my dad, but with her own mother and next door to her grandmother. So when she went into labor, they made this great circle of support and they encouraged her to walk and move and shower. And they didn't quite understand why you would go to a hospital for a healthy event like birth. So they literally kept her home. until she was fully dilated. So in a time that birth was very, very medicalized, as you know, I was born in 57. So at a time where people were getting twilight sleep and all kinds of things done to them, my mother arrived fully dilated and I was born 20 minutes later.
Wow.
And so she bypassed all the kind of drugs and interventions of the time. And my great grandmother and grandmother and extended family of aunties had all breastfed for 2 years. So this was a time where people were often given meds, even against their knowledge, to dry up milk. But because my mother never lost consciousness, she advocated to never let me go to the nursery and started breastfeeding, to a lot of what she says of people barraging her of like, you shouldn't do that, and trying to give me formula. And again, I was breastfed for 2 years, which is quite unique
Yeah.
at my age and time, right? In what was happening in birth. So I give great credit to a strong family that believed in birth and supported each other in those beliefs, not only just in sharing the stories, but literally being present for each other. My mother had everyone around her at home to give her that support she needed to stay home through the earlier parts of labor.
Mm. What a great start. So were you the oldest? I gather, it
Yeah,
sounds like you were the first. Were there more?
I was the first. I was the first of the family to be born in a hospital.
But are there siblings after you, or
Yes.
and how did they manage? Did she do the same thing with them, or did they grab her in the hospital sooner?
No, she did the same thing. She really was able to show up very late in labor, and realize that, even today, she realizes if she had a choice, that's not where she would have given birth. She would have stayed home. But having to be in a hospital, she wanted to be there as little as possible.
Good for her. Yeah. And so your early childhood, also what, besides giving birth, what did your mother, is she a homemaker? Did she have any other interests? Your dad, what was he up to?
Yeah. So my mom and dad had me quite young. They were both 19. Today we would say that was young. I think back then that was very normal for them. They didn't perceive themselves as being too young. But it ended up that they did have a divorce. So when I was kind of 7 or 8, their marriage was already in trouble. And by the time I was 10, they were divorcing, which in that time, nobody was divorcing, at least not in our community. So my mother was very ostracized from many things in the community, being a divorced woman. But she was really strong. And I realize now how much she buffered us as children from what was going on in her life that was difficult in that. And she really tried to always be there, even though she was now back to work part-time. She ended up taking a job that she could drop us to school and pick us up to school and just be at work during those hours. So she was still very much kind of there for us. And having a lot of like girlfriends and friends around. So, and we had this big Italian family. So always felt like there were people there. We were never kind of without someone to share a story or do something with us.
And what other siblings? How many and what genders?
Yes. So I have a brother that's 6 years younger than me.
Mm-hmm.
And then later, each of my parents remarried. And then I inherited some step brothers and sisters on both sides. And then my father had another baby with my stepmother. So I have a half brother I'm still very close with today. So in this all, I ended up being kind of the oldest of 10 by the time all the other halves and steps and kind of weighed in. And then my father even adopted 3 children at one point. So they added into the mix as well.
Wow. Keeping the big family alive.
Yes. Definitely a lot of interesting, especially a lot of that was happening in my teen years, right? And
Mhm.
teen years are always so interesting for us. So for me, navigating that there were these new step parents on both sides and new siblings and then adopted siblings, it was an interesting time.
And they all got along and had gatherings, or?
Yeah, I mean, we were all kind of lucky that I guess we were all pretty much teenagers, other than my new little baby brother that came along. I was 15 when he was born. But at 15, I had so much fun having a baby in the family. So I was
Mhm.
very keen to take care of him. But the rest of us were teens together. So we didn't really have rivalry. We were like new friends. We had like somebody in the house to hang out with. So we actually had a lot of fun together.
And your mother and father were friendly and cooperative? And great.
Yes, I spent kind of mixed my teen years. I lived part of them with my mom and my stepdad, and they definitely had a stricter approach. Like they didn't want as many people in the house and things like that. My father and my stepmother were much more about, everybody can be here and do things. So I did move in with my dad for a period of time to be part of like I liked having lots of people around and that we were all kind of accepted and equal and really encouraged to be together in a way that felt good. But then at some point, it almost felt like too much of that. And then my last year of high school, I came back and finished high school living with my mom and stepfather and kind of was ready to move into the next phase of life.
So what was school like for you? Did you like it? Was it
I love school. I think I like the social part. And so I love to be with people. So school for me was that opportunity to be with friends and people. And I like learning. So I look back to and I know that every teacher makes a difference in our life. And some people have teachers that don't always inspire them. But I feel I was pretty gifted with some great teachers that were very inspiring and memorable in my life.
mm. And then you went on to college?
I did. I started at Villanova University. And again, for people to kind of frame in the times, we're talking 1975. And Villanova, I was the first class of women joining the university. It had been a Catholic male school. So interesting to come into a very male, patriarchal Catholic university as a young woman in those kind of formative years, right? So I found it very interesting. And I already was the one that was always questioning. So I had a lot of questions and debates with professors that I realized were not always welcome debates on their part, especially one that sticks out for me. I was in nursing and I had to take a medical ethics class. And I learned pretty quickly that the answers to the ethics class were Catholic doctrine. And I kind of debated, was that ethical? Because I didn't feel that was giving us a full scope of what medical ethics was. So by the end of my second year at Villanova, it became aware to me that I wasn't going to change the university and I was not going to change the profession of nursing, even though I was trying so hard, that it probably was better for me to leave and find another place that I felt more at home and more in line with. So I did take a gap year and became a flight attendant on a charter airline and flew all over the world. And that was my beginning of literally seeing the world and from different vantage points and different opinions and different cultures and beliefs and values in a really broad way. And that landed me literally on a stayover in Montreal. And I fell in love with McGill University. So on a whim, one August day, I applied and was accepted and started at McGill that September. So I finished my studies in education at McGill University.
Hmm. So you put the nursing and education together, and it sounds like a good mix. Um, what did you do after that?
So by the time I was at McGill, I still had these flight attendant benefits. This is kind of a fun story. And so I was in an education class, and it was just before holiday break in December, my first semester there. And one of the professors just shared with the class, she said, there's probably not anybody that could really switch your plans and do a semester abroad. But I had someone just cancel, and I have one spot to go to England, but it's like right after break. You'd have to be in England in like 2.5, 3 weeks. And I just thought, I'm a flight attendant. I have benefits. I can hop at that time. I could fly any flight anywhere in the world for like $15. So I said to her, that sounds like fun, but I'm a transfer student in. Can I still graduate if I take a semester at another university? And she said, I'll work it out for you. So a couple weeks later, I was now studying in England. And then I ended up going up to Scotland and taught skiing. I also became a ski instructor along the way on this. And so by the time I graduated McGill, I had had all these experiences in between of traveling. I had extended my 4 years to 5 years. And I ended up getting married to someone I met in Canada. And I graduated in June of 81. And in August of 81, I had my first son. So my teaching got put on hold as I thought, okay, I'm starting my own family. And that was an amazing time because I had these stories and wisdom, as I shared with you, from my family about birth. And now it's 1981 in Canada, and Canada had lost all their midwives. Midwifery did not return to Canada to 1992. So I couldn't find a midwife. The few that I found that were like underground were literally illegal, and they were worried about prosecution. So they had to turn me down because they felt it was too risky for them personally to attend me. So it really put me into this really challenging time of, what do I do? I have a medical system that means well, but is literally putting everybody down and over medicalizing birth. And I have a belief system that birth is natural, healthy, and normal, and I can do it. If my 80-year-old great grandmother could walk around and lean over a kitchen sink, then why couldn't I do it? So it took me on a journey, and I finally interviewed a lot of OBs. None of them really listened to me. As a matter of fact, many were very condescending to me, like, I've got this, stop worrying about it, just get the epidural, don't be a martyr, and you'll have a great birth. And I was outraged at like the way I was being treated as like, honey, don't worry about it. So I really couldn't figure out what to do. And then one day I had a bright idea. I was a student at McGill University. So I went to their medical school at lunchtime, walked in quite pregnant, and said, I'd like to find a medical student or an intern that's never seen a birth. And they all laughed at me and they said, you mean people that have attended births? And I said, no, because all of you that have attended births are being indoctrinated into a broken system. And I really want someone that can learn with me, because I've never given birth, but I've heard a lot of stories. And so I was really blessed to find this one young intern who kind of laughed and shyly said, are you sure? I haven't seen a birth. And I was like, perfect. We're going to be a good team. And his preceptor agreed to allow us to work together. And I came armed literally with Suzanne Arm's book, Immaculate Deception, in my hand, and Ina May Gaskin's Spiritual Midwifery, and told him that these were 2 books he had to read because these were kind of my sources along with my stories, and that I looked forward to dialoguing his views and my views and finding the way that we could work together. And so because of his willingness to listen and to respect me and to find the blend between, medicine and my beliefs and wisdom. I had a really powerful birth that changed my life and made me think, I want to help people. What if I didn't have my great-grandmother's story? What if I didn't know about birth? I probably would have just walked in and turned my body and my baby over to medicine. And I probably would have had a different path in life. But the powerful experience of taking the stories I knew and bringing that forward into my own way to listen to my body and my baby and to birth in a way that felt right to me made me want to help other people to hear stories and follow what feels best for them.
So how did you manage to do this in the system with the intern? What were the mechanics of it?
Well, we had a lot of fun visits together where I kind of drafted my, I want to move, I want to give birth upright. And I know now more people are doing that, but in 81 in Canada, everybody was on their back. They had their legs up in forceps, and episiotomy was 100% routine. So I remember one day I went into him and I said, I'll make a deal with you. If you don't cut me, I won't cut you. Because I feel exactly the way you probably feel about me cutting the tip of your penis off right now as you cutting my vagina. So we made a lot of very bold agreements, and even to birth upright was unheard of. And they had a labor room, and this, then a delivery room, and then a postpartum room. And so literally the delivery room was like what an OR would look like today. And I remember it, this metal table with stirrups. And here I knew I wanted to squat on it, and it's narrow. So we even practiced ahead how I could squat on the end and use his shoulders for my kind of grips, and that would free his hands to catch the baby. So we did a lot of preparation in just dialoguing what I wanted. But then, fast forward, I go into labor. It's a beautiful Saturday morning, August 1st, 1981. I'm excited to get to be where I'll be honored and respected and give birth. Labor's going quickly. And I get there, and the nurse says to me, sorry, honey, your doctor's across town at another hospital and he's in surgery. I don't know when he'll get here. I don't care what agreements you've made with him. Hospital policy, get in the bed. Let's plug you in with that IV and everything. And I didn't plan for this. So this was a real shock. And I had this moment, and I said to the nurse, before you plug me in, because the policy was even once you were on an IV, they didn't let you get up to go to the bathroom. You literally got into the bed. And if you had to go, you got a bed pair. And I was like, I'm not doing this. So I said, before you plug me in, let me go to the bathroom. She said, good idea, because we won't be letting you go again. And I said to my husband at the time, don't worry about me. Go find some place to rest. I'm going to be fine. And he just kind of looked at me like, what are you about to do? But he knew me. And luckily, the bathroom door had a lock. And I went in and locked the door. And I basically said through the door, I'll come out under two conditions. Either I have my baby and I'll open the door, or my doctor gets here. Because I didn't feel safe in a system that wasn't going to honor and respect me. And that bathroom had a sink, and I literally could lean over it. And although at that point my great-grandmother had transitioned on, her wisdom and her presence was there with me. And although my grandmother and my mother were back in the States and I was in Montreal, I just envisioned the three of them there with me, like my circle of support. And I know my great-grandmother said, keep moving. So I kept moving. And they were banging on the door at one point, threatening to call psychiatric, and threatening me that I would harm my baby by doing this. But I felt more afraid to come out and have drugs and meds given to me without my permission. And luckily, they conveyed to my doctor that I was locked in a bathroom, and he was able to get someone else to take over the surgery, and he left and came. And it was such a wonderful moment when there was a knock at the door and I heard his voice say, "Debra." And I just, and he said, "How did I know it would be you when they said there's a woman they might do psychiatric evaluation on locked in a bathroom in L&D?" Yeah, so when I opened the door, and as so often happens in labor, when you have stress, right, our body doesn't open, we hold back. But when that stress is removed, however we can release it, and just seeing him, I felt so safe again that my labor went really quick. I knew I was getting close, but boom. And I'll never forget, because I got really scared and I had this moment of doubting myself. And I think that's what happens to so many of us in birth, right? But we want to look up into the eyes of those that believe in us and hold that trust. And that's what he did for me. He looked at me eye to eye. He held my hand and he said, "Debra, you're doing it. You can do it." And he kind of doulaed me along, right? He was my doula in that beautiful moment. And then I got fully dilated, and you get that energy. And I got up on that delivery table. People wanted to come in and watch because they had never seen anyone give birth upright. And they wanted to see the woman that was birthing like a monkey. And so I let many people come in, because at that point I thought, I don't mind there are people there, and maybe this is an educational moment to see that we can birth upright. And as I held his shoulders and pushed my baby out over an intact perineum, I remember he yelled out, "I did an intact birth." And I yelled back, "No, I did an intact birth. You caught the baby. Let's get the language right." So my son was born in a way that just felt so respectful and powerful, having kind of my elders and family with me in my heart and in spirit, and then having a physician who it was his first birth that he caught, and just really was able to support me in the way that I wanted. And it felt wonderful.
And he was able to bypass all the rules, and as an intern, that's pretty amazing. They even allowed him to do it himself. But good for you, making waves.
Totally making waves. And I think his preceptor was supportive and kind of knew that I was like, "Don't come near me." Like, I wanted the person that I had the agreements with, right? We had a relationship, my doctor and I, and it was important to me. I feel sad today when so many people don't have that continuity of care, right? Haven't built that trust to feel safe with the person that's going to be there with you at such an intimate, sacred moment that you'll never forget. So he gave me an incredible gift by, again, standing his ground, right? To be able to do that with me.
And did you maintain contact? Does he know what he launched?
He did. I haven't been in touch for a while now, and it's been on my list to want to reach back out. I do know that he ended up backing up home birth midwives, particularly in some rural areas of Quebec. So for a period of time, I think we influenced each other's lives, right? As he saw maybe a different side of birth than he was being educated on at the time.
Oh, wonderful. Well, I hope they're still doing home births in Quebec. It's rare nowadays, but, and then did you have subsequent kids, and what were those birth experiences like?
I did. So I have 2 more sons, and I moved back to the US because after that birth, I really wanted to be closer to my grandmother and mother and family, and have my children grow up with them. And so I came back, and not having found a midwife in Canada, this is one regret I have. I didn't really look for a midwife here in the US. So I didn't realize that we would have had more midwives. Not many yet, but there were some here then. And I wish I had found them then. But instead, I made the wrong assumption that I would find a female obstetrician that I thought would really listen to me. And as I had done in Canada, I would be able to navigate the system. That was a wrong assumption.
Mm.
It ended up being, my birth was going well. I felt confident in my ability, but I felt like I was really in transition, getting very close to pushing. And at that time, the nurses would call the doctor in, and there were no cell phones, right? 84. They would come. This was during the day, so my doctor had to leave office hours to come. And I had created this nice ambiance with dim lights and music. And my doctor walked in the room, flipped on the lights, said, turn that music off to the nurse, came over and said, let me check you. Like, oh my goodness, nothing calm or sensitive or caring. Really rough. This is a woman, rough and startling. And she quickly does this rough vaginal exam and turns to the nurse and says, I can't believe you called me. She's only 3 centimeters. Now, I knew I was far more than that, but I shut down because she startled me and made me afraid and broke my kind of sacredness that I have. And she got so angry at the nurse for calling her out of office hours, she threw the nurse out and told the nurse she couldn't take care of me anymore. She wanted a new nurse. And I started to cry because I had a good relationship with that nurse and I wanted the continuity. And the doctor said, no, I'm not letting her back in here. So now I end up with a strange nurse. My doctor leaves and I give birth 20 minutes later because I really was ready to give birth, but I shut down. And as soon as everybody left the room, I gave birth. My husband was there, but I gave birth in the room alone. And so they came in and the nurse got mad at me. And I was like, hey, like, you all were having your own argument out there. I was giving birth. And they quickly cut the cord and took the baby into another room because there wasn't a doctor free and they wanted the baby to be checked. So my son went into another room with another obstetrician that was doing a delivery. And then by the time the obstetrician came in to me, it was only probably maybe 5 or 10 minutes, but my placenta hadn't come yet. And he decided he didn't have time to wait for it. So he began to do cord traction, of which the placenta broke. And now, a little while later, I end up in an OR for a manual removal of a placenta, and I'm bleeding from a cause from them, right? And now someone going in and scraping your uterus is incredibly painful. And I'm crying saying, that's hurting. And they said, you had a natural birth, suck it up. They wouldn't even give me meds for the manual removal. So by the time I felt like in trauma, by the time I was reunited with my baby, and my doctor now rounded to come check on me, and I just refused. I said, I don't want you in the room with me. I want a different doctor that's going to check me. And for me, that birth is, as much as it's joyful because I welcomed a son who's dear to me, the birth itself was traumatic and I wasn't listened to. And it set me on a course to find midwives. And so my third son was born with a midwife who's still a very dear friend of mine at a birth center. So again, a home birth, just not my house, someone else's home.
Mm-hmm.
But that birth was both healing and beautiful, and what was really my pleasurable birth, because I could birth in the way that I always wanted, really honored and respected, and in such a safe place that felt joyful, pleasurable. And it almost was a little comical because I was taking a shower in that birth when my water released. And when my water released, the baby just came down. And so I'm in the shower going, the baby's coming, the baby's coming. So the midwife says to me, do you think you can walk out of the shower, at least into the room? And I start walking and the baby's head comes down. So now I'm in a doorway between a bathroom and a bedroom, and I've got a head between my legs, and the floor is wet, I'm dripping wet, and my midwife has to drop on the floor under me to try to catch, and like I'm dripping water. And then, I mean, I'll share, a little bit of poop comes out, so I poop on her head. So I poop on her head, there's water she's catching, and I'm laughing, and she's going, don't push, don't push. And I'm just standing there, and like that feeling of feeling my son inside in his last kicks, his head out, and that we're having a giggle about the fun situation we're in, but that it still felt safe, right? Like I knew he was coming into her hands, someone who I grew to really love and trust and respect. And that was a beautiful birth.
I'll bet she had a lot of mileage out of that story.
Yes, totally. And I have to say, the nurse came in behind to help, and the nurse slipped on my poop and fell. So it was truly like a comical birth. So I'm like, I always tell people that are nervous that you're going to poop in birth, I say, I think I've got you outdone. I pooped on the floor that the nurse fell on and stepped in. I pooped on my midwife's head, and we're all still friends.
What a story. Now, how far apart were were your sons born in?
81, 84, and 88.
Mm-hmm.
So,
and
yeah.
Were you full-time mom then for that period?
Yes. Yeah, I was breastfeeding and caring for them, and really wonderful time. I enjoyed that time.
And you were back in New Jersey near your family and extended family, and so they had a real village experience.
They did. And I spent a lot of time when the boys were young with my mother and my grandmother. So my grandmother was with us a lot. And that was really special for me. It was special to see the children have that relationship, but also, right, like I think parenting takes the village.
Oh,
it was really important to me to have people that could help with them, that could cook a meal, that could nurture us all, right? Mm-hmm. And yeah, I think that made a difference.
So your husband, through all this, how did he handle it?
Yeah, the second birth really traumatized him a lot. And the third birth, he was a little bit overwhelmed with how it was all going and things were happening, but he really saw, how much better that was. So it was a journey for him to watch me birth through all these different scenarios too. And then being a young man, and he was working in banking, and the 80s were kind of the Wall Street crazy years of mergers and acquisitions. He was a father that was working a lot. So he wasn't around much to be a part of all of that. And I think that's why I was even extra appreciative of having family nearby, because I can't imagine if I had been really alone and parenting at those points. But that did leave our marriage to eventually drift apart. I often say now, I wish we had different skills and tools. No one really supported us or gave us the knowledge of how to navigate the challenges that we were experiencing as parents, and me staying at home, him working really long hours and that. But yeah, so we did have a divorce. We finally reached a point in time where we realized that we were like ships, like people on ships that sailed to two different ports, that we had different ways that we wanted to be. And luckily we did that, as friends, and have always been friendly with each other. And I did go on to marry a second time. The boys were a little older, and Jimmy came into our life, and he also had two young children. So we merged our families, the five of them together, when they were young, from like 5 years old into early teens. So the children were younger than I was when my families had remarried. But coming from blended families, I felt really comfortable with the blended family. And it's been really nice to be in relationship where we have the same beliefs and values, and we not only finished parenting, but now we're grandparenting together. So
Great. Now, what steps are there between this and when you came up with the orgasmic birth concept, and what what sequences can we go through?
well, after my own first birth, I became fascinated with why so many people were just turning their body over to medicine. Like, why didn't they know this information that would make them want a different experience? So I became a childbirth educator. And so even while I was having babies and my children were young, I started teaching classes in my house. And so, 2 nights a week, all these people would gather, and I could be breastfeeding my baby, or a toddler would run through. But I started working with people, and they started asking me if I'd come to their birth. Now, this was before I knew the word doula. I didn't know any of that, but they would ask me to come to either take pictures, or, you were our educator, we'd love it if you were there. And so many of the births I went to, I just kind of sat in the corner and smiled, right? I'd take a few pictures and tell them they were doing great. And after the birth was over, they would look at me and go, "We couldn't have done it without you." And I would smile and say, "I didn't do anything. You did everything." And they would say, "But I'd look over and you were always smiling." And we thought, well, if Debra's smiling, everything's good. And if you hadn't been there, they said, we would have had all these gaps where no one was in the room. The doctors and nurses were busy, and we would have gotten scared, and we might have made other choices or done other things. So for me, it was the beginning of really seeing how having those people that believe in birth, that are there with you, could make a difference. So I started attending more births, and then learned about the word doula and learned there was a name for what I was doing. And I was really blessed to be at the very first meeting of DONA International in 1992 in Boston. And
For our viewers, DONA is Doulas of North America.
yes, and I met Marshall Klaus and John Kennel and Penny Simpkin, just incredible treasures and founders of the doula movement, Dr. Klaus and Dr. Kennel, amazing pediatricians, neonatologists, researchers. And so really got to be at this beginning of the movement. And there's a funny story that ties in. At that meeting in 1992, there was also a doctor from Canada there, from Montreal, a Dr. Michael Klein. And I sat by him at lunch, and I said to him, I gave birth in Montreal, because he at the time was dean of the McGill Medical School. And he said, "Where did you give birth?" And I said, "Well, I don't know if you know this, but I used one of your students, one of your first year residents." And he looked at me and he said, "Was that you?" And he had heard the story. He goes, "You're infamous here in Canada." I was like, oh, I didn't know it got beyond the walls of the few people that were there that day. So my doula beginning and my birth kind of collided all together at that very first meeting with Dr. Klein. And
So amazing that a dean would come to a doula meeting. That's pretty progressive.
isn't that, he's been such an ongoing supporter of doulas playing an essential role, that that emotional well-being in birth is so much a part that enhances the physical well-being. So it all comes together.
And for our viewers, check out the interview with Phyllis Klaus. Marshall has died by the time we started this project, but her description of how they discovered it by accident, because a research assistant happened to be in the room, and naturally would touch the mothers, and they saw these amazing statistics, went back to figure out why, and found out it was her. But it
Isn't
was
that amazing?
a complete accidental discovery.
Yes. It's so amazing because I think we're feeling it more and more with COVID, missing that
Yeah.
human touch, right? And
Yeah.
that connection. It's so essential for us in our well-being every day, but certainly at birth. And Phyllis has been such a big part of my life, such a mentor to me as well. She was at that first meeting, and I've done so much with her and Penny Simpkins since. So as I started to attend more births and then become a Dona doula trainer along with them and teaching doulas, I started seeing so many people that were having joyful, loving, pleasurable, powerful births. And I thought, why aren't we talking about this? The media has a language of pain and
Oh,
fear, but where's the language of pleasure and love? And so that for me was like I was on that path already. And Ina May Gaskin had talked about orgasm at birth. Elizabeth Davis, another great midwife, two midwives that were pioneers at the time, were talking about the sexuality of birth and this pleasure factor. And I had a chance to work with them and meet them. And I have to say, I was literally sound asleep. So your subconscious mind is powerful. And the film Orgasmic Birth was born in my dream. I had a dream and vividly saw the film and saw myself make it. And I had no interest in films or filmmaking. So it wasn't like I was living out that part, but I was wanting to get a bigger message out about what's possible in birth. And when I woke up at 2 a.m. with that dream, I literally woke my husband and shook him and said, Jimmy, I have to make a film. And he laughed and he said, go back to sleep and have another dream. But when I woke up in the morning, it was so strong in me that this was something I needed to do, that I went on the quest, and the film unfolded. And Orgasmic Birth, I thought I was making a film, but it's become a movement. And so many people all over the world have joined in, as well as the film came out in 2010, really, 2009, but became really prevalent in 2010. So we're, 11 years later, and now the science is totally supporting what we've been saying, is that using the science and following the hormones of childbirth. Dr. Sarah Buckley, another prominent physician that's taught us so much about the hormones, along with Dr. Michelle Odant, we're really seeing that having love and pleasure and orgasmic birth is really everybody's birthright. So it's been an amazing journey, right? From my great grandmother, who I think really started me, to seeing now a movement unfolding from everyone coming together and giving voice to what's possible.
Mm-hmm. How long was the gap between your dream and when the film was put together?
5 years.
Mm-hmm. That's not bad for a gestation of anything.
Yes, and at times I felt like it was a long gestation, but we were constantly moving forward during that time. It was a lot to do, to learn, to bring people together, to get funding. There were many aspects to putting it together. So yeah, now I look back and I think, okay, 5 years wasn't too bad from that time.
And for viewers, I've interviewed Sarah Buckley, who is my neighbor in Australia. I see a lot of her there. So you can go check that video out too. I haven't been able to get Michel Odant to agree. At first he said he would, and then he disappeared. But he was a keynote speaker at our first summit. And my young daughter was drawing pictures when I first met him in a hotel lobby in Melbourne. And he asked if he could have the picture that she was drawing, and she said no. Anyway, interesting story with him.
Yeah.
So the film came out 2010, and now you've got a book out. So what are the stages? Well, say more about the movement, how it unfolded, and um, how that, I'm assuming, morphed into the book.
It did. Um, as soon as the film released, people all around the world literally started hosting screenings. Some of them were renting movie theaters out and 500 people were coming together. And some people were just, doing it in their own home and inviting a couple friends and neighbors over. But these screenings really started to give voice for people dialoguing. And, it didn't matter if you agreed with birth being part of a woman's sexuality and pleasurable. The film sparked conversations and debates, and that's great, right? Everybody can see what works for them to see within it. And so shortly into those screenings, I was holding a big event here in New York City near where I live. And at the end of the event, a woman came up to me and handed me a card. And she said, I can tell you're going to be inundated with people that want to talk with you right now. So I'm going to give you my card. On the back, I'm going to write the name. There's a cafe 1 block over. I'll be waiting there. Don't worry if it's an hour or two, I'll be there. And so it was an amazing moment. And of course, there were these lines of people that wanted to talk and share. And it was about an hour and a half later, I went to the cafe and I thought, will this person really be there? And there she was sitting in the corner reading a book. And I went over to her and she said, your film was incredible. And I am a book agent and I'd love to represent you. I'm sure I can sell the book in no time. So I had never, had a book agent and thought about making this into a book, but I knew someone who would really love to do that. And that's a dear friend of mine, midwife Elizabeth Davis. And I called Elizabeth and I said, I'm here with a book agent. What do you think about co-authoring Orgasmic Birth, the book, with me? And she said, I'm in. And so Elizabeth and I, within 2 weeks, had a proposal together with the support of Erin, our agent. And 2 weeks later, we had 3 different offers.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was really like boom, 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 where the film took 5 years, the book actually from gestation to publish was 9 months. So it was a perfect gestation and release to come out kind of with the film still showing so many places. And just now, I just finished my next book because in working with so many people on how to incorporate the sacredness, the sensuality, the pleasure, honor the challenge in birth, I see so many people like myself that had a powerful birth, but then get into parenting and don't really have a tool, don't necessarily have maybe all the support that they were hoping for in their relationship. So my newest book is The Ultimate Guide to Sex After Baby, Secrets to Love and Intimacy. And it's part of my own story and what I wish I had had, but also the stories of many people around the world, what their challenges have been and many ways that they've overcome it. So it's a nice kind of toolkit for someone to take and then create their own toolkit of healing and honoring for their own body, their sexuality, and then for their relationship.
Yeah, it nests well with Ellie Taylor's book on Becoming Us, which I got to know Ellie in Australia and actually got to edit her revision of the book. And it's a very, it fits together with Robin Grill's book of how to recognize your own parenting shadow issues. And of course, our Why Dads Leave that came out around the same time as Ellie's first edition. So we're all on the same track. And to me, it's the nuclear family. That's the disaster that we were never meant after millions of years to suddenly try to have 2 people when it takes 3.87 adults per infant to meet everybody's needs. And you had the luxury of, or the benefit of a real extended family. So fortunate. And no one recognizes that to speak of. The media certainly don't. And we continue that same ridiculous trying to do it one or two people.
It's so hard. And I find, and I don't know if you're in this place too, but now I'm a grandmother and I want to be really available as my grandmother was for me, but I'm still working and still need some of my income for survival. So I go into this place of obviously doing what I can, 1 or 2 days a week, I can really be there. But I have my own guilt of grandmothering in this new time where I'm still young, so still doing things, right? And so, yeah, it's issues in many different ways.
How many grandchildren do you have?
4, and 5th one on the way.
Are they nearby at least, or?
They are. They are. So that's good. And really do getting 1 or 2 days every week to be there and to take the kids and give the parents breaks and cook a meal. And so I try to say, okay, I am really involved for sure. Mm-hmm. But then I think back, sometimes my grandmother had, the privilege of already being retired so that she was able to be with me a lot more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Have we missed any important chapters of your illustrious career?
I think one that I would share that I'm incredibly proud of, and I'm proud of all of it, like it all feels good, but as I was also journeying as a doula and an educator, and the film was starting, but this was even before the film and these concepts, I was a part of, and I think you were too, the Coalition for Improving Maternity Services. The acronym was KIMS, and that began in 1996, and we created the 10 steps of mother-friendly childbirth. And so being a part of so many of us, right, that came together to really honor kind of mother-baby family, the companion to baby friendly, which was focused on 10 steps for breastfeeding, which we still use today. Well, that initiative then got so much kind of interest globally. And you may remember our dear friend, she's passed on, but she's always in my heart, midwife Mary Kroger. She was doing a lot of international work at the time, both in breastfeeding and birth. And she saw that we needed to have a modification of the US Mother-Friendly Childbirth Initiative to make it international. And so she and others started an international committee to look at how we could adapt an international version. And I was sitting on that with her, and she was quite ill and ended up very quickly into late stages of cancer. And so by the time the meeting came around, she was not able to attend. And we had received funding and flown people in from different parts of the world. And she asked me if I would chair that meeting for her, which was truly an honor to do. I have to admit, I didn't feel competent to do it, but I believed that if she believed I could, I needed to do it. And at the end of that meeting, I said, one of the things we need to do, as we knew it was apparent Mary wouldn't be able to chair this initiative, we needed to elect someone who could head this. And everyone said, we already took care of that when we were in breakout groups. And I said, perfect. Who do you think it should be? And they all said me, which was not what I was expecting, nor what I wanted to do. But I took that on in Mary's honor as she passed, and I gave her my word that I would continue with the initiative until it was a global standard. Little did I know that that would take 25 years. But I've been chairing this. We ended up splitting off to being our own organization because we got so big and international. So I chair the International Mother-Baby Childbirth Organization. And 2 years ago, which was always part of our vision, we thought it would have been sooner, but better late than never, we've partnered with FIGO, the international obstetricians and gynecologists of the world, as well as partnered with 20 organizations, our midwives and nurses and pediatricians and many groups around the world to come together to support what's called now the International Childbirth Initiative, and we are implementing around the world. And FIGO invited me to co-chair it. So again, I kept saying I'm going to retire from this position, but I felt like we're in this great phase of really implementing, and I feel great honor to carry through with Mary's vision and many others that have been part from the beginning of wanting to see us to bring this all together, to really have a respectful care framework and really honor all the emotional well-being as well as the physical well-being of every mother-baby family as they give birth. So I had to add that because for me, that's another huge part. It's been my volunteer.
Yeah, I was going to bring it up if you didn't, because I knew you had, various people have told me about your role in it. Were you actually at Mount Madonna in '96?
No, that was the only meeting I missed. And I feel like people were calling me. So I had some like tidbits, especially of the chocolate run, because they knew that I love chocolate and I would have been out with the people that ran off to get chocolate. But yeah, I was sad I missed that.
Yeah, that was my first contact. And when I met all these amazing women and a few men, well, Jim Prescott had invited me to it. And he and I and Suzanne Arms were latecomers, so we roomed together and off campus. It was quite an experience, yeah, with the comet, no less, at the same time. So, yeah, you've done some wonderful work, and sound like you've had some fun through all of it too. I haven't lost sight of the pleasure part. That's so crucial.
I feel pleasure is like water. Don't go without either any day.
Yeah.
And even in the challenges, I feel like we need to make those moments, right? To find that calm and connection.
Yeah. One thing I'd like to ask you about, one of the moments at Mount Madonna was when we brought up the issue of circumcision. And we had it was Marshall Klaus was one of the main objectors to it. But over lunch, I had an argument with Ina May Gaskin, who said, well, Steve's circumcised and he doesn't think it made a difference. I said, well, how would he know?
Right.
Jim Prescott and Ray Castellino and I kind of formed our committee. We got to get this issue in the group. And when we came back after lunch, the facilitator was going to move on to the next thing. And we said, no. And Marshall was gone. And Suzanne was part of it too. She knew he was gone. So we brought it up again, and it was still like, it'll be anti-Semitic and all that, but 99% of circumcisions aren't Jewish and they're done in the hospital. So it was, you mentioned her name a while ago, Penny Simkin, who came up with the compromise that we got it in. And then they tried to take it out when they did the what do you call it? The sixth grade version.
Right.
And I had to get, what's his name? The guy who had been in Denmark with WHO, who's since Marston Wagner. And I called him and I said, what was going on? And he went to bat and said, no, you can't do that. So, but realizing that the US and South Korea are the only two countries anymore that do circumcise, it became moot. So has it been dropped out completely, or?
Yes, it has, because from the global perspective, right, as you said, there's only two countries.
Yeah, and I don't know where it's going in the US, whether, how many, we struggled after the meeting to try to get a certification process going. I know Barbara Hotelling was involved, and it was a real struggle with questionnaires and procedures, and we didn't have the funding or the energy to do it. But now that's in place. And how many baby-friendly or mother-friendly hospitals are there in the US? Is it more than just 2?
No, sadly, we only ever, even at the height of the initiative, we only had one, and that was Grants Pass, Oregon. And as sometimes happens with these things, you have a champion that gets everybody on board. And then when the champion left, it kind of slid back to old ways. So I don't believe that they're still adhering to it. I think there was a birth center as well. So I
Yeah.
should have said two, but it never got traction in the US. And that's been really interesting because when we look globally, we're having an easier time getting global sites. And especially right now, as we're really trying to ramp up and bring sites in as implementers around the world, for many, COVID really is shining a deep light into all the cracks in the system. I mean, the cracks have been there, and those of us, right, working in it have been talking about this all our life. But now people that weren't seeing them are seeing them.
Mm.
And it's amazing. I'm still trying to get sites in the US right now to join the International Childbirth Initiative and be kind of a pilot implementer in the US. And we're struggling. I'm still hopeful, but so
I
far
thought
now,
I thought we had picked up some. That's discouraging, huh?
really discouraging. And I'm in talks with a few, and certainly some birth centers. Some of the birth centers are, I think, literally in process to fill out the paperwork right now. And birth centers do the 12 steps, right? That's just their
Yeah.
model of care. But and I'm glad, I want to recognize them, and we want all birth centers to join us and be ICI implementers. But I really would like a hospital to step up. And it's not about having to have the 12 steps, it's about making the dedication to
Hmm.
strive to achieve them.
Yeah.
So there's no blame or shame. Come in wherever you are, right? And we all can do better. So I'm hoping the US will
Yeah.
join.
I remember when I was up near Ukiah, I knew a nurse who worked in delivery there, and we tried to get some interest going at the Ukiah hospital, but it was an uphill battle and never happened. Well, got some work cut out for us still, huh?
Yes, and I, I'm hoping that 2021 will be the year that the U.S. will come on board with the site
Yeah.
and join the rest of the world, and that we'll really see these sites do well, and we'll have a lot more stories to tell. And then for my story, once this has reached implementation and it's been proven, then I feel I can finally pass the torch to the next person and say that I've fulfilled my promise to Mary
Mhm.
Kroger, and I'm ready to move on to other things. But it's been a real honor to
Yeah.
have stayed this course all this time.
Well, any other parting wisdom to our viewers down through, we hope, the centuries that follow?
I hope all our viewers really know your family stories. I mean, I don't think I'd be here doing what I'm doing
Mm.
if I didn't know my great grandmother and my grandmother and my mother's stories. And I feel like today people don't always tell those stories, the birthing stories and other stories of life. We need to make time for our stories to really listen to them and hear them and hold them and incorporate their wisdom.
Wow, well said. Well, thank you, Deborah. This has been great, and may I wish you the best in your ongoing adventures.
Thank you, John. It's been truly a pleasure seeing you again, because your life touched mine so deeply so many years ago, and to come back and share stories today was really an honor. So thank you.
All right, I'm going to end the recording.